The room froze the moment Linda Carter said it. She didn't whisper, didn't lower her voice, didn't pretend it slipped out by accident. She said it with perfect clarity, loud enough for the entire private dining hall to hear. "I wish you were never born." Conversations died instantly. Glasses halted midair. Even the soft jazz drifting from the speakers choked into silence. And right in the center of it all stood Grace Carter, 27 years old, staring at her mother with a stillness that made her bones feel hollow. She felt dozens of eyes swing toward her, waiting to see if she would crumble like they always assumed she would. But instead of breaking, something inside her rose, something quiet, steady, and long overdue. Grace's voice didn't shake. Her hands didn't tremble. She simply lifted her chin, the warm gold lights from the restaurant glinting off her tear-rimmed eyes. For years she had tried to earn even a small piece of affection, a sliver of acknowledgement, a moment where her parents might see her. And yet here she was, hearing the sentence every child fears spoken out loud. Before she could speak, her father, Mark Carter, shifted uncomfortably in his chair as if he suddenly realized the entire room was staring at their table. But Linda didn't flinch. She folded her arms like someone who believed she had said something entirely reasonable. Grace took a slow breath, stepped back and said quietly, "Excuse me," before walking out. The cold Seattle night wrapped around her as she pushed through the restaurant doors. Rain misted against her cheeks, cooling the heat burning under her skin. She stood under the awning for a moment, her breath shaky but controlled. She thought she would cry, collapse, or maybe even scream, yet nothing came. Inside her chest was only a deep, echoing emptiness. Grace walked to the curb, heels tapping rhythmically on the wet pavement, each step clearing the fog inside her head. The city lights blurred into streaks of blue and gold as the rain picked up. For the first time she felt untethered, not free, not yet, but severed from something she had been clinging to for far too long. Grace grew up in a two-story house on a quiet street in Rochester, a place people often described as peaceful and predictable. But her childhood had never been peaceful. The Carter household revolved around one person, their younger daughter, Emily. Emily was the golden child, the girl whose name made Linda smile even on her worst days. If Emily sneezed, Linda rushed over with tissues like a nurse attending royalty. If Emily brought home a ribbon, even one given to every participant, Mark announced it across the dinner table like breaking news. Meanwhile, when Grace achieved something meaningful, something earned, the reaction was always the same. A polite nod, a brief smile, a quick pat before the spotlight tilted back to where it belonged. Grace remembered being 14, clutching her first-place certificate from the regional math competition like it was fragile glass. She held it out to her mother with trembling excitement. Linda didn't even look up from the laundry basket. "That's nice," she murmured before adding, "Oh, Emily is volunteering at the hospital today. That's real impact." Those two words, real impact, became the measuring stick Linda used for everything. Grace could work 3 jobs, pay half the bills, and hold their household together, but it never matched Emily's real impact. Grace learned to survive in the silence that followed her achievements, even as she poured herself into early morning shifts, late night studying, and responsibilities no one acknowledged. But she kept going. She always kept going. In college, Grace took on 3 jobs, tutoring, cleaning offices, and restocking shelves because bills didn't magically pay themselves. She never complained, never asked for help, never even hinted at how exhausted she was. Her parents didn't ask how she was managing either. They only asked when the payments were due. Some nights after her late shift at the cafe, she would wipe down tables, staring at her own reflection in the polished surface, imagining what it might feel like to be seen. Not praised. Not celebrated. Just seen. But visibility was a luxury she was never offered. So she built her life quietly, piece by piece, hoping that one day her hard work would finally matter. Years later, when she was accepted into Stanford for her MBA, her academic advisor cried harder than her mother did. Linda simply nodded and said, "Emily just started her rotations. Now that's meaningful work." Grace stood there with her acceptance letter still warm in her hands, shocked by how easily her mother brushed past something she had fought tooth and nail to achieve. Still, Grace held on to a small hope that graduation would tilt the scales, that maybe, just maybe, her parents would finally look at her and see the daughter who had survived everything alone. She had no idea how wrong she was. After graduation, Seattle felt like a fresh start. The skyscrapers, the wet pavement glowing under the streetlights. The air filled with ambition. It felt like a city where people reinvented themselves. Grace landed a consulting job that challenged her, pushed her, and recognized her. For once, she believed she was stepping into a future where her parents might actually feel proud. She booked a private room at Delmonico, a restaurant she had only admired from the outside. Crisp linens, soft gold lighting, glasses that sparkled like untouched diamonds. Grace covered everything, not to show off, but to build the bridge she still hoped could exist. A bridge she didn't realize was already burning. Her colleagues arrived first, warm and enthusiastic, asking about her plans, her dreams, her future. Her manager shook her hand and whispered, "Tonight is your night, take it in." Grace felt a flicker of joy, a feeling she rarely allowed herself. But the moment her parents walked in, the temperature changed. Linda's heels clicked in sharp, judgmental beats. Mark wore an expression Grace knew too well, calculated indifference. They brought no flowers, no card, not even a simple congratulations. They stood in the doorway like visitors checking on an obligation, not parents celebrating their daughter's success. Introductions began. Her professors, co-workers, and managers offered genuine compliments, praising Grace's leadership, intelligence, and work ethic. One professor smiled warmly and said, "You must be incredibly proud of Grace. A Stanford MBA is no small achievement." Linda's smile tightened. "We're proud of both our daughters," she replied. "But Emily, she's saving lives in the ER. That's real impact." The sweetness in her tone was sharp enough to cut. Another colleague tried to redirect the praise back to Grace, but Mark chuckled and said, "Grace is clever, sure. But Emily's work is meaningful." The embarrassment washed over Grace in hot waves, and she forced herself to smile even as something inside her cracked. The night should have been hers, but instead she felt herself fading into the background again. When her manager stood to give a toast, the room softened with admiration. "Grace is one of the most capable consultants I've ever worked with," he said. "She handles pressure with grace, no pun intended, and she's destined for great things." The applause warmed her skin, and for a moment her heartbeat steadied. She turned toward her parents, hoping for even a flicker of shared pride. Instead, her father leaned back and whispered, "Compared to a doctor? It doesn't measure up." That sentence, light, dismissive, hit harder than any shout could. Then came the moment that shattered everything. Linda lifted her glass, eyes sharp, voice honeyed with judgment. "You know, I don't understand why Grace takes things so seriously. Emily never causes drama." The words stung, but Grace held her posture. She was used to the small cuts. What she wasn't prepared for was the knife that followed. Linda's next sentence floated out casually, almost gently, "I wish you were never born." The room froze. A fork dropped somewhere. Someone gasped. Grace felt the air leave her lungs, felt her chest tighten, but her face remained painfully still. She didn't scream, didn't beg, didn't crumble. She simply stood and walked out. Outside, the rain met her like an old friend, cold, quiet, and honest. She walked through the city with no destination, heels splashing against the wet concrete. By the time she reached her apartment in Bellevue, her blazer was damp and her hands were trembling. She kicked off her heels and sat on the floor in the dark, staring at the blinking router light. 11 missed calls. One message, "You embarrassed us. I hope you're proud of yourself." Proud. The word twisted like a knife. They had never been proud of her, yet they expected her to feel proud of them. Something inside her shifted, not with rage but with finality. Grace opened her banking app. 3 automatic transfers glowed on the screen. Her parents' utilities, Emily's tuition, and a portion of the family mortgage. Her finger hovered for a moment. The old Grace, the dutiful daughter, the quiet provider, fought to breathe. But the new Grace, the one standing in the aftermath of her mother's cruelty, finally took control. One by one she canceled each payment. Confirmation. 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 The silence in her apartment deepened, but it no longer felt empty. It felt peaceful. Like the first breath after being underwater for too long. The next morning, her friend Michael showed up with takeout containers and a bottle of wine. "Checking to see if you're still alive," he joked softly as he stepped over a stack of books near her door. Grace sank to the floor beside him, leaning her head back against the couch. "I think," she whispered slowly, "I think I'm done." Michael didn't interrupt. He didn't urge her to forgive or understand her parents. He simply nodded, his voice gentle. About time you saved yourself. For the first time in a long time, Grace felt the ground beneath her stop shaking. Something inside her settled. She wasn't drowning anymore, she was surfacing. 3 weeks passed in steady silence. No apologies. No explanations. Nothing. And strangely, Grace didn't miss them the way a daughter is supposed to miss her parents. She missed the idea of them, the version she had kept trying to imagine, the one she hoped existed behind all the cold, dismissive years. Letting go of that illusion hurt, but it was a clean kind of pain, the type that comes when you finally stop reopening an old wound. Work became her anchor. Her restructuring project swallowed her days whole, but she didn't mind. For once, she wasn't pouring herself into a void. Her voice mattered. People listened. Her effort finally met respect instead of silence. When a local business magazine asked to feature her work, Grace accepted without hesitation. The interview focused on resilience and navigating shifting ground, themes Grace understood in her bones. She didn't mention her parents, she didn't need to. The journalist sensed something beneath the surface but respected the boundary. When the article went live, messages poured in from strangers, people who had survived parents who only loved the version of them that stayed small. People who whispered, "Thank you for saying what I couldn't." Grace read each message with quiet gratitude. Their words felt like pieces of a world she was slowly stepping into, a world where being unseen was no longer her permanent address. But silence in families like hers rarely lasts. One Tuesday evening after a 12-hour workday, Grace walked down her apartment hallway exhausted, blazer slipping off her shoulder. Through the frosted glass of her front door she saw two silhouettes. At first she thought it was a delivery. Then she heard her mother's voice. "Grace, open the door. We know you're there." Grace paused. Not because she feared them, because she no longer owed them urgency. When she finally opened the door, her parents swept inside without waiting. As if her home, like her life, still belonged to them. Mark sat stiffly on the couch. Linda paced once, arms crossed tight as if keeping her anger from spilling. "We need to talk," Linda said sharply. Grace didn't respond. "It's about Emily," her mother added as if the reason was obvious. Of course it was Emily. It always was. Mark cleared his throat. Emily's internship was cut. Her tuition balance is overdue. If it's not paid, she'll be forced to take a leave. Grace felt nothing, no shock, no sympathy, not even annoyance. Just clarity. Linda's voice sharpened when Grace didn't immediately react. "We need your help," she snapped. Grace blinked slowly. "I help?" she asked quietly. Linda scoffed. "Don't be petty, Grace. She's your sister." Grace laughed short, bitter, unbelievable. "I paid her tuition for years," she said. "I covered your bills. The mortgage. I worked myself raw so this family didn't fall apart. And you told a room full of people you wished I'd never been born." Mark stiffened. "We were angry. You made a scene." Grace stepped closer, voice calm but sharp. "No. You made the scene. I walked out of it." For the first time her parents looked small. Like two people finally seeing a truth they couldn't control. "You're our daughter," Linda insisted, voice rising. "Family is family." Grace exhaled slowly. "You don't get to play that card now." Linda's eyes flashed. "You're being unreasonable. You owe." Grace cut her off. "I owe nothing." The room froze. Mark's jaw tightened. "We raised you," he argued. Grace shook her head. "You didn't raise me. You drained me." The words struck like a lightning bolt. Linda's face blanched. Mark's hands stilled. They weren't used to hearing the truth spoken plainly. Grace walked toward the door, not to leave but to open it. "If you came here to apologize," she said quietly, "I'd listen." The hallway light spilled into the room, cutting across the carpet like a dividing line. Linda and Mark said nothing. Not a word. "But if you came here for more," Grace locked eyes with each of them. "That conversation ended the night you disowned me." Linda scoffed, arms crossing defensively. "You'll regret this. One day you'll realize you need your family." Grace felt her heart settle, calm, sure, unshakable. "Then consider me as if I never existed," she said softly. "Live your lives as though there was never a daughter named Grace." Silence swallowed the room. Mark's lips parted. Linda's breath hitched. The tension, the air, the space between them froze like glass. For once, Grace wasn't the one shrinking inside it. She nodded toward the doorway. "It's time for you to leave." Her mother hesitated, searching for leverage she no longer had. Nothing worked. She turned sharply toward the door. Mark followed, reluctant, like a man walking away from a fire he didn't think would spread. When the door finally clicked shut, Grace didn't collapse. She didn't cry. She simply stood there, breathing in a quiet that felt like her own. In the days that followed, she waited for guilt to claw back in, for second-guessing to creep in like fog under a door. But nothing came. Instead, a stillness settled inside her, gentle, steady, unfamiliar. Work surged forward. Her team's project exceeded every forecast, and when the client renewed the contract, her manager pulled her aside. "You're ready," he said, handing her a leadership offer she had fought for without realizing it. This time she didn't question whether she deserved it. She simply accepted, her voice firm. "Thank you." The magazine article went viral. People from around the world shared their stories: children ignored, daughters overlooked, sons dismissed, siblings erased by favoritism. Grace read every message with quiet understanding. She knew what it felt like to fight for scraps of affection that never came. That night she stepped onto her balcony. The Seattle skyline shimmered beneath a thin layer of mist. The lights reflected off the bay like scattered stars. She wrapped her sweater around her, hands warm against the mug she held, and breathed slowly. The world felt bigger now, roomier, like she finally had a place inside it. She thought about the girl she used to be, the one wiping cafe tables after double shifts, the one rehearsing imaginary conversations with her mother, the one carrying responsibilities that weren't hers. That girl had tried so hard to earn love that was never offered freely. Grace whispered into the night, "I'm sorry you went through that." Not to anyone else, to herself. The Seattle breeze brushed her cheeks gently, almost like an answer. She wasn't fixing her parents anymore. She wasn't shrinking to fit their expectations. She was finally honoring the part of herself she had abandoned for years. The next weekend she met Michael for brunch at a quiet cafe near Pike Place Market. They sat by the window, sunlight warming their table. Between bites of pancakes and sips of coffee, Michael studied her face. "You look lighter," he said. Grace smiled softly. "I feel lighter." He nodded. Cutting ties doesn't always mean hate. Sometimes it just means you stopped letting people break you. Grace stared out the window, watching the street bustle with life. "I think I finally stopped trying to be the daughter they wanted," she said, "and started being the woman I need." As the months passed, her life began to settle into something she hadn't expected. Peace. Not perfection. Not the absence of pain. But peace. Her apartment felt warmer, her mornings less heavy, her nights more restful. She made new friends, traveled for work, and even let herself explore new hobbies. She found joy in places she used to overlook: quiet bookstores, long walks by the water, cooking simple meals just for herself. None of it erased the past, but it softened it. It reminded her that healing wasn't loud. Sometimes it was simply choosing herself every day. One evening, Grace received an email from a young woman in Ohio. "Your interview saved me," it read. "I thought I was the only one who felt invisible. But your story made me believe there's hope." Grace read the message 3 times. She felt something warm bloom in her chest. Not pride, not ego, but connection. For years she had lived unseen. Now her story was helping others step out of that same shadow. She replied with simple words, "You deserve to be seen. Start with yourself." It was advice she had finally learned to follow. On her balcony that night, the Seattle skyline glowing beneath her feet, Grace lifted her face to the cool night air. She wasn't waiting for her parents to call. She wasn't hoping for an apology that would never come. She wasn't replaying old conversations or trying to fix what wasn't hers to fix. She was simply breathing steady, unhurried, free. She understood now that she wasn't the absence they treated her as. She wasn't a mistake. She wasn't invisible. She was a whole woman shaped by strength she built alone. And as she stepped back inside, closing the sliding door gently behind her, she whispered the truth she wished someone had told her years ago: "I am enough." Moral lesson. When a family refuses to value you, choosing yourself isn't selfish, it's survival. Your worth isn't defined by the people who overlook you, but by the courage you find to walk away and build a life where you finally feel seen.